650 entities are trying to win one of those coveted licenses. Again, at least 650. The law gives extra points to applicants that meet social equity requirements, like having an owner with a low-level drug charge on his or her record, or hiring workers from a high-poverty area.
So the state's got a clear choice, right? This time around, we can't say that there weren't quality minority applicants out there. You see the folks behind me, they're ready to go, they're vetted, they have good applications, and they have the knowledge and experience required to be successful in this industry.
This is about repairing and rebuilding communities that have been disenfranchised based on this war on drugs for so long, and it was the wrong war on the wrong drug.
The pool of applicants for those licenses certainly appeared to be quite diverse, but skeptics say that they're wary the law will actually work as intended. Now, this is not the only phase. January 7th, another round of applications is going to be open. This time, Paris, that is for those seeking state licenses to grow smaller amounts of cannabis, so craft grower licenses, also to transport marijuana or to infuse products with cannabis.
A lot to keep up with. Amanda, thank you very much.
Sure thing.
And make sure to check out our website for a guide to marijuana in Illinois. There you can find details on the state's law, a map of dispensaries, and much more information, updated frequently. And you can find the guide at WTTW.com/podguide. Well, 2020 is off to a busy start for the Chicago Police Department, despite a reduction in crime last year. Brandis Friedman has that story and more of what's making news in Chicago tonight. Brandis.
In Paris, Chicago police are investigating a police-involved shooting this evening in the Belmont-Cragen neighborhood that left a man dead. Police say they were pursuing an armed man on foot. An officer fired his weapon, but it is unclear if he struck the man. The Cook County Medical Examiner and the Civilian Office of Police Accountability are both investigating. Now, this is after closing out 2019 with record low crime numbers. CPD says overall crime fell 10% from last year, the lowest since 2015. Among other crimes, that rate includes murders, which fell 13%. The city credits the use of data and technology as well as strengthened community partnerships for the reductions. An Inspector General's report says the number of children who've died while in contact with the Department of Children and Family Services has risen from 99 in 2014 to 123 in 2019. The report also says the agency is facing the same child welfare problems it faced 16 years ago. Among them, children being killed or dying after DCFS workers leave them with abusive parents or their partners, and being kept beyond medical necessity in psychiatric hospitals. The report makes recommendations for training and discipline of DCFS staff to better protect children in their care. If you parked your car downtown today, you might have noticed it cost more to park at a city meter. The new year brings a new rate structure. Parking in the Loop will cost you 50 cents more at $7 per hour and $4.50 an hour in the Commercial Business District, which is everything between North Avenue and Roosevelt Road and between Halsted Street and the Lake. Parking rates in the West Loop are more than doubling from $2 to $4.50 an hour to align with downtown rates. The city says these increases are with the congestion tax zone for ride-hailing fees. The last time rates were raised was 7 years ago in 2013. And for more on this and other new laws, please visit our website. He hasn't played a game in the major leagues yet, but White Sox prospect Luis Robert has been generating all kinds of buzz. Now the team has reportedly inked the slugging outfielder to a long-term deal, $50 million over 6 years with team options for 2 more, which could bring the deal to some $90 million. The signing was first reported by USA Today. It means Robert is likely to open the season on the South Side instead of in the minors, where contract considerations could have meant a delay to his big league debut. Luis Robert was the 2019 Minor League Player of the Year when he slugged 32 homers while batting 328 and stealing 36 bases across 3 levels. As for the weather, tonight mostly cloudy with a low around 31. Then tomorrow again mostly cloudy with a high near 38 degrees. Now Paris, back to you.
Thank you, Brandis. Still to come on Chicago tonight, the end of an era for the Chicago Bears. We visit with longtime PA announcer Jim Reeben, as he calls it a career. The latest efforts to protect Lake Michigan from invasive species like fish, mussels, and more. How a dramatic fall in the price of lithium-ion batteries could make electric vehicles more affordable. How one local hospital is using artificial intelligence to detect and act on strokes. We go inside the headquarters of Chicago's Bloodshot Records, and Northwestern researchers tackle the uncertainty surrounding static electricity. But first, some of today's top business headlines from Crain's. Here's editor Ann Dwyer.
Thanks, Paris. The public outcry over the high price of prescription medication has done little to stop drug makers from raising prices again for 2020. Bloomberg notes that drug prices in the new year have increased an average of more than 5% industry-wide. And among the biggest hikes is Humira, the best-selling arthritis medicine marketed by North Chicago-based AbbVie. The price for Humira is going up by more than 7%. Meanwhile, insuring your car with Geico is about to get more expensive, too. Crain's reports that the auto insurance giant is raising rates for more of its Illinois drivers by more than 3% on average. It's Geico's first rate hike in Illinois in 2 years. The hike is expected to begin in March and will affect nearly 300,000 policyholders statewide. And finally, Chicago's real estate and construction industry is mourning the passing of one of its longtime leaders. J. David Pepper for years led Pepper Construction, a Chicago company with annual sales topping $1 billion. Pepper was part of the third generation of his family to work at the 92-year-old company. Among the firm's highest profile projects during his tenure were the contract to build the giant Starbucks Reserve Roastery on Michigan Avenue, as well as the massive revamp of Wrigley Field. David Pepper was 59. For Crain Chicago Business and chicagobusiness.com, I'm Ann Dwyer. Back to you, Paris.
Thanks, Ann. It's the end of a considerable era for Bears fans. The team's longtime public address announcer, Jim Reeben, worked his last game at Soldier Field in December when the Bears faced off against the Kansas City Chiefs. He came to the team as a backup announcer in 1979 and started announcing full-time in 1982. Fans who've been to a game will recognize his voice from some of his signature call and response with the crowd.
There's a timeout on the field. A gain of 33. Good enough for a Bears.
And Jim Reeben joins us now. He's also an attorney and one of the public address announcers for DePaul men's basketball. Jim Reeben, it's a pleasure to have you here.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
All right, 38 years as the soundtrack for Bears games at Soldier Field for fans. Why hang it up now?
Well, it comes a certain time when you know it's probably in the best interest of both the team and yourself. I thought the 100th year would be a perfect symmetry to the end of the career. And coming off the 2018 season, we had a hint of a championship. Well, regretfully, we wound up 500.
You thought you might have a couple extra games to announce. And about 40 years ago, you're calling DePaul basketball games. You're in practice as an attorney. You write a letter to Jim Fix basically saying, hey, do you need a PA announcer? And that was basically it, right?
Exactly.
Jim Fix being the former Bears general manager.
Jim, who really turned the Bears around in the mid-'70s, come to fruition in 1985. But DePaul had finished in the Final Four in '79, and I thought that would be a good entree to say, well, I brought some luck to DePaul. Are you interested in me? And I got a letter back from the Bears PR director, Ted Harris, who in short said, we're not looking to replace our man, but do you want to be the backup? And of course, I jumped at it, and 3 years later, it was my game.
Their man at the time, of course, was Chet Kopic. 3 years later, so you're in the saddle. 1982, what do you remember about calling your first games at Soldier Field?
What I remember was Soldier Field had a very antiquated PA system.
Oh, I remember.
And there was a holdback of about a second to a second and a half. And if those of you who are watching would remember on Laughing, Gary Coleman would cup his ear not to hear it. So I was quite nervous, but the first game was the last game before a strike in the NFL. And the Bears played New Orleans. Before the game, after the anthem, each team met at midfield, and shook hands, a solidarity handshake, and Ditka went crazy on the sidelines.
Oh, really?
And the game was just awful. It was a 10-0 game. Neither team played with much effort. Then there was a strike all the way till the middle of November.
And then fast forward a couple years, of course, 1985. What was your experience calling games for that team? I mean, it had to be remarkable.
It really built itself over a period of time. The defense did not start off as hot as they finished, but the momentum built with us beating Dallas 37-0 in Texas Stadium, because that was Ditka's mentor, and they got over the hump, having lost the previous year. And so it really caught fire. And then in the playoffs, It was 2 shutouts back to back.
And you're also a lifelong Bears fan, so as the PA announcer, do you have to kind of rein in your emotions a little bit if you're just kind of announcing sort of the penalties and the yardage and the plays?
I had to be careful, and I was always coached by the Bears organization. You can get high, but don't get too low. And sometimes it, showed up in my voice, a foolish
You'd be
penalty.
annoyed or something?
Yeah, it's just like, not quite like that,
We'd hear
but like holding against the Bears. When I used to give the preliminary signals, and the tone of my voice would definitely connote how I was feeling.
Well, you said that used to make refs pretty mad because before they'd call a penalty, you would just announce what the penalty was.
That's correct, and there was a mandate that came down from the NFL office that no more.
Give us one of those patented penalty calls, if you would.
Well, to make the crowd happy, so the team's driving against the Bears, there's a flag, and I see the head linesman signaling to the referee, it's offensive holding. Preliminary signal, holding against the Packers. And the crowd, of course, would respond to that.
That's a way to get the crowd ginned up. All right, so another memorable year was '88, not because they went to the Super Bowl or anything, but because that was the year of the infamous Fog Bowl. So you're sitting up in the boxes up there. You have no idea what's going on in the stands because it's completely obscured by fog. How'd you get through that game?
Kenny Valdeseri was the Bears PR director, and he arranged for a walkie-talkie to be hooked up into my booth, and the gentleman from the NFL stats crew was relaying the game to me, and I was relaying it to the crowd. So I was doing really true play-by-play, much more descriptive in the call, more particular in the result of the play. Instead of my 15 minutes of fame, it was 30 minutes of fame.
Because the crowd probably didn't even know what the play was.
No.
You basically just had to relay the game to them.
Correct. Vern Lundquist on CBS Sports made the comment, I don't know how this PA announcer is getting this job done, but he is. And then he realized midway through the fourth quarter what was happening, and his comment on TV is, why not us?
Wow.
Yeah.
So you had the hookup, but the CBS crew didn't. Everyone wants to know, I remember going back to the early 90s, there's a timeout on the field, and then that eventually sort of got into, there's a timeout where on the field? Oh, so first of all, where did the timeout pause on the field come from?
It actually was in the script when I started. Stadium music came on in the late 80s, so we had live music. Whether it was Ben Arden or whomever was playing, we had to cue them. And the cue was, because there was no communication with the band, the timeout. So the band knew it was their turn to play. Then the pause got them ready on the field, and the music would start.
Boom, so they'd cue right away. There were Bears fans when I'd go to games, they just always find the whole thing funny. One guy said, well, where does he think there's a timeout? In the stands? Of course it's on the field.
Yeah, I've heard that from quite a few people.
And then it sort of evolved into the crowd playing along with this where what did you make of that when the crowd started buying into that?
It started to buy into it the last year in Soldier Field, the old Soldier Field, and it really took its own life on when we went to Illinois in 2002. The speaker system there was so much better than I was used to, and it just started. It started in the south end zone midway of the 2001 season, and then it grew almost organically.
Yeah, and you referred to that speaker system at Old Soldier Field. I remember, the south end zone might hear something 2 seconds before the north end zone. It was like a valley of sound. How did you deal with that?
Sometime with the wind blowing, people in Burnham Harbor could hear me more than the people in the stands.
Oh, you were walking out of the stadium, I could hear you.
Yeah.
I'd be near Roosevelt Road, and I'd still hear you. In recent years, I noticed that you've kind of taken on more of a cheerleader role. I always enjoyed how it was almost kind of it was a basic delivery, but not overdone. It was subtle. Now it seems like the NFL wants more cheerleading. How did you take to that?
Well, over the years, the Bears were very concerned that I was over the top too much, urging the crowd. So I tamped it down after that. In the middle of last year, I was called by one of the Bears executives and said, the NFL doesn't think you're enthusiastic enough. And that really shocked me because all these years I was too enthusiastic. And basically I was told, if you want to urge the crowd without being a cheerleader to make noise, especially on defense, go ahead and do it. So the first game I really unleashed it was the Rams game in the 2018 season.
I remember that.
And for that day, the crowd got a game ball from Coach Nagy.
And is this sort of a movement in the NFL now? Is this where the Bears are going? They want to have a cheerleader in the PA booth?
It is very, especially on defense. It's a league-wide edict, I'm pretty sure.
Now, in your daily life, I mean, this is your hobby. This is what you do for love and probably for money. But you're a lawyer. So how do you balance those two careers?
Being a lawyer is a challenge, but great fun. I've been doing it over 45 years. But to sort of get away from the intensity of being a lawyer, the hobby of being a sports announcer, I always loved sports. I grew up in a sports family. I was on a campus radio station in college. So I was lucky enough. If you love sports, I've lived a great life, really, in basketball and football.
Absolutely, and you've been the soundtrack to so many games for me and my father, because we had gone to over 100 games together. Lastly, are you going to enjoy a Bears game as a fan now?
It'll be interesting. I haven't sat in the stands since 1978.
So that was it. So not at Wrigley Field, at Soldier Field.
Soldier Field.
So you'll just be a regular fan.
A lot of my friends have season tickets, and they say, "Come with me, come with me, come with me," which I will. But the first game will be very, very weird for me, especially driving there and not mentally preparing to do the game. And everyone has their own style, and I hope the person that replaces me doesn't try to mimic me or any of the things I said, unless they feel it's appropriate. Be yourself and do it the way you think you should do it, and you'll be just fine.
All right, words of advice for your successor before we go, for old time's sake. Can we do one?
Which one do you want?
Timeout.
All right, everybody. There's a timeout.
Where?
On the field.
Ah.
You got it.
Jim Reeben, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Pleasure to
meet you.
Great
being here.
Best of luck to you. And now to Brandis Friedman and the new scientist at Shedd Aquarium. Brandis.
The Great Lakes are home to an estimated 180 invasive species, fish, invertebrates, and plants that have an impact on native species. Shedd Aquarium has a research team that studies Lake Michigan and other bodies of water to understand and protect aquatic populations. The newest member of that team is a freshwater biologist, Scott Colburn, who joins us now. Welcome to Chicago and Chicago Tonight.
Thank you.
You've been in town about 3 weeks.
Yep.
How is it going?
It's going really well so far. I'm loving Chicago.
Excellent. So what sort of research and field work are you planning to do in the Chicago area?
In the Chicago area itself, I'm really interested in how some of the nearshore fish, largemouth bass, smallmouth bass, how they're interacting with some of the invasive species like round goby that have spread throughout the Great Lakes over the past 20 years. So we think that in many cases some of these native fish are starting to eat round goby, becoming part of the food web. And this could actually, for some species, be a benefit for them. They're finding a new resource that they're able to eat. And so we are very interested in what is happening around Chicago with these native species and the invasive ones.
And just so that we know, how do invasive species get into the Great Lakes?
There are many ways. Many of the ones that we're concerned about right now, the zebra and quagga mussels and the round goby, they probably came in the ballast tanks of ships. They over from Europe. When they come over empty, they put the water in so that they're stable on the voyage. They get to the Great Lakes and they release to the water, and that's how these invasive species got here. I'd like to add very quickly with that there's been regulations changed around ballast water, and since that's happened, the number of invasive species coming through that way has basically dropped off completely. So it's been a very successful regulation. And also these species can move on their own through canals and shipping ways.
So you also do tissue analysis and tracking. What does that reveal?
So the tissue analysis is for diet. So you can think of it as the you are what you eat principle. Everything that you eat becomes part of your body. And so I use a technique called stable isotope analysis to look at food webs. So we get long-term, multiple month or year-long pictures of what fish have been eating over time. So we can ask if they've been eating round goby or zebra mussels for extended periods of their diet. And then with tracking, we can collect fish on site, do a very quick couple minutes surgery, insert a tag, put the fish back in the water so it has a quick recovery time, and then we can use receivers that we put out in the water, and we can track their movements over long distances.
So you've done similar work also in other Great Lakes, correct?
Yes.
What did you learn there? How did that go?
So I've been part of a project on Lake Ontario where we were looking at using the stable isotope analysis to look at lake trout diet, native species of conservation concern, and we found that they were consuming a majority of round goby in their diet. And I also had another study in eastern Ontario in smaller lakes near the Great Lakes where small little pumpkin seed sunfish, we've all caught them as kids when you go out fishing, they've switched their diet in multiple lakes in that region, and it's mostly zebra mussels now. So it's native species that are responding to some of the invasives that have entered the system.
So give us an example of the ripple effect that an invasive species can have on the native species.
Right, so the zebra mussels are a great example of that. They've invaded first, and they were feeding on, they took up so much of the phytoplankton and zooplankton, the almost microscopic bits of food in the water column, that a lot of fish weren't able to access that food anymore. Then round goby entered the system, and they're actually a natural predator for these mussels, and so they start eating these mussels, and then the fish, native fish in the system, they're able to eat these round goby when they couldn't eat the mussel. So it's changing the entire food web from the base up, and so it's all of these changes that are happening over time as the native species respond to the invasives.
Is there much variation from one Great Lake to another, or is the same thing kind of happening in all of them?
No, each of the Great Lakes cover such a large geographic area that we don't necessarily see the same patterns from area to area. Even within the lakes there can be variation, and that's why it's important that we look at these patterns across each of the lakes and not just assume what's happening in Lake Ontario is the same for Lake Michigan.
There's also a financial incentive to conservation, right? What is that?
Absolutely. The Great Lakes are a huge economic driver, both in terms of tourism and fisheries. It's over $20 billion a year in the U.S. alone. And so there's a huge economic incentive to keep the system in balance.
Chicago's periodically had die-offs of alewives. Those are non-native species as well.
Correct. They are a non-native species that was introduced so long ago most people don't even remember it. But the alewife populations, when they first came in, they exploded and they got out of control. And that's one of the reasons that the managers decided to start stocking Chinook salmon and the other salmonids that became so popular as part of fisheries. And unfortunately, in recent years, with the zebra mussel and quagga mussel invasion especially, many alewife populations are starting to decline in the Great Lakes.
How does the shed partner with other agencies and institutions around the Great Lakes?
Well, the Great Lakes has been this great collaborative network going on for a long time now. It's actually one of the big success stories of the region and how it's been doing so well. And so SHED partners through researchers like me and the freshwater team that I'm part of. We come in with pre-existing relationships and we develop new ones, both with government agencies, universities, there's private interests, and so we can form these great relationships to share resources and ask these questions across the entire Great Lakes Basin.
Okay, Scott Colburn from the Shed Aquarium, welcome again and thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And we're back with more right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part through the generous support of the Julius Frankel Foundation.
Could battery-powered electric vehicles soon cost the same as gasoline-powered cars? A dramatic fall in the price of lithium-ion batteries over the last decade is transforming the economics of energy. Prices have fallen almost 90% since 2010. Not only could this mean cheaper electric cars, but it has ramifications across a host of other industries. And joining us now to help explain what could be an energy revolution is George Crabtree, senior scientist and distinguished fellow at Argonne National Laboratory in Lamont and a professor of physics at the University of Illinois at Chicago. Welcome back to Chicago Tonight.
Well, thank you, Paris.
Okay, so a quick reminder, what exactly is a lithium-ion battery?
Well, it's a battery that came out in 1991. Sony brought it out because they had a camcorder that they wanted to make personal, and the battery was too heavy. So they had a very strong business motivation to bring out this battery. It was a factor of 2 lighter and a factor of 2 smaller than the next best battery at that time, and it made the camcorder a success.
And of course, it's the battery in your smartphone and the battery in your electric car.
Everywhere, and your laptops and your tablets and everything. And this has been an enormous success. Can it take over the cars? I think this is the next question.
Well, and we mentioned the prices come down 90%, so where was the price in 2010? Where is it now?
Well, you can, the target is $100 a kilowatt hour. We're probably, for electric cars, maybe 125 or 150. So we don't have very far to go. And a lot of people predict that when the price hits $100 a kilowatt hour, that's the moment that electric cars will be competitive economically with gasoline cars.
And so if it's $100 a kilowatt hour, it was over $1,000 a kilowatt hour. What factors contributed to the precipitous fall here?
I think there were 2 things. So the technology got better. We made the cathodes in particular much better than they were, and that's been a slow incremental increase. If you look at the energy density as a function of time, it's gone up a factor of 3 since 1991. And the price has come down even more, as you said, a factor of 10. So the technology got better, and the second thing is we learned how to manufacture. So a thing called the learning curve or the experience curve, every year the manufacturers got cleverer about cutting a few more corners and saving a little more money. And this is what did it. It's really the mass market which brought the price down.
And to our question at the top, what does that mean in terms of electric vehicles perhaps soon costing the same as a gas-powered vehicle?
Well, I think it's very interesting. Even now, cars that get a lot of mileage per year, like taxis, go about 70,000 miles a year, whereas our personal cars go 12 or 15,000. They're already at cost parity with a gasoline car. You may have noticed that, 15 or 20 years ago when the Prius came out, suddenly all the taxis in Chicago became Priuses.
Correct.
Because it was cheaper. It just made sense. And I think the electric cars are on the verge of that probably already for taxis, that should happen.
Where you'll see a lot of taxis or Ubers,
yes.
Because that'll be more cost effective.
It'll be more cost effective and it'll just happen.
And how is Illinois and Chicago and the Midwest doing in terms of charging stations? Because it's one thing to own the electric car, it's another to be able to drive it long distances.
Yeah, for sure. And I think this is the next big issue. So we need lots of charging stations. Now, as you know, there are lots of people in Chicago who live in multifamily dwellings and they don't have an outlet outside, so they have no place to charge. They have to go to a public charging station. And this, to service that 50%, we're going to have to roll out a lot of them. And I don't think we can just let them roll out helter-skelter. There should be some managed, sort of regulated rules about what you can do for a charging station.
At this point, legislatively, there doesn't seem to be any big ideas to tackle climate change or to mitigate it. So how do batteries play into a potential market-based solution where the price will just push consumers to make that choice on their own?
That's definitely going to happen, and I think maybe 2025 or before is the time when that will happen. It's not very far off. And when suddenly, even for personal cars, the cost parity is hit, it'll take off. The economics will drive it, and we won't have to say the word climate change. We'll just do it because it's cheaper. It'll be on the road to dominance. I think it would help if we could have a few incentives to encourage the buying of electric vehicles. There are some which are expiring now, unfortunately.
Right.
It would be nice to have them extended, and even for a fairly long time, another 5 to 10 years, just to make sure that the EVs take off.
Well, and the issue here is when you're charging batteries or when you're providing the power that the batteries store, there are green ways to do it and there are ways that are not climate change friendly. So explain that.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think this is critical. So in places where the grid is, let's say, coal-fired, if you're charging your EV with coal-fired electricity, you're basically putting out the same amount of carbon emissions, except they come from the power plant. They don't come from the car. So it's critical to charge with renewable energy. That means wind and solar typically. Or in northern Illinois, at least emissions-free would be nuclear. And that's critical. If you're charging your EV with fossil-fired electricity, you're only getting half the benefit. So I think there needs to be guidelines, rules, incentives that encourage people to charge with renewable electricity.
And in Illinois has had a few legislative efforts over the last several years to move toward green energy production. Where is the state right now in being able to do that?
Well, they have big plans. At the moment, the plans have not yet been achieved, and they're still in the future, going slower, much slower than some of us would like. And I think we need to encourage wind. Actually, in Illinois, can be quite dominant. We have good wind. The sun is not too bad, and these two things together can really do it. But we do need to incentivize, and I think the state could have a plan to make this happen, and perhaps the new governor might want to push this agenda a little bit harder than, let's say, has been the case in the past.
And the other issue now with perhaps this first generation of battery-powered cars is what to do at the end of their life, and what happens to that battery. So what are the options here?
You know, that's a very interesting question. If you ask, do we have enough lithium in the world to convert, let's say, half the cars in the world to electric, the answer, it's an interesting answer. It's yes, if you recycle. If you don't recycle, you're going to run into a problem. And that's very clear. Everyone agrees on that. So the hot issue right now is how to recycle those batteries. You know, for lead acid batteries, it's actually cheaper to get lead from an old lead acid battery than it is to dig it out of the ground. That is not true for lithium and cobalt, which are the two key elements in lithium-ion batteries. It's cheaper to get it out of the ground than it is to recycle. So we need to do R&D, and in fact, Argonne has just launched a program, I think it was starting in February of this year, to do the R&D to make it economically profitable to recycle lead lithium-ion batteries. And I think this is where we have to go.
So at this point, there is no profitable way to do it. You're still figuring that out. Explain how the drop in the price of batteries could affect the overall power grid as more and more people move to microgrids where batteries store energy.
For sure. So the EV revolution will do a lot to eliminate carbon emissions. The grid will do even more. And at present, if you look at the prices of wind and solar versus, let's say, fossil alternatives, in Nevada and Arizona, which are both very sunny, you can combine solar with a battery, with storage, and sell the electricity for less than 3 cents a kilowatt hour. Wow. That's lower than anything else in those states. Prices are falling, as you indicated earlier, and they're continuing to fall. I think we can look for the day, not too many years from now, where it will just be a no-brainer. If you're going to install new generation, it would be wind or solar, but paired with a battery to make it much more dispatchable.
All right, George Crabtree, we look forward to the research that you continue to do in this area. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Paris.
And there's more Chicago Tonight just ahead, so please stay with us.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Allstate. Allstate is investing in Chicago's youth. We believe good starts young. That's why we're helping our youth develop the skills they need to achieve success in life. Allstate is proud to empower the next generation of leaders.
And now we go to Amanda Vinicky with an innovation in medical technology. Amanda.
Advocate Lutheran General Hospital is now using artificial intelligence software to detect strokes via brain scans, and they say it allows them to initiate treatment faster than ever before. The hospital says it's the first in Illinois, Wisconsin, and Indiana to use AI software in this way. It's called VizAI, and it scans images and uses an algorithm to identify strokes caused by blockages in major arteries. Joining us to discuss this technology and how the hospital uses it is Dr. Demetrius Lopez, director of the stroke program at the Advocate Healthcare System. Thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight. And Doctor, to begin with, what is a stroke and why is acting so quickly so important?
A stroke is basically a sudden change in your function. You cannot talk, you cannot move your arm, leg. Sometimes you have the worst headache of your life. And strokes can come sometimes either by blockage of blood vessels or could be a rupture of a blood vessel. And the definition between if it's a blockage or a bleeding is extremely important to decide what treatment you can perform. Now, why is time sensitive? Well, stroke is, just think about this. Every minute you lose about 2 million brain cells. And to put that,
how many brain cells do we have?
Putting that in perspective then, if you have, for example, 1 hour of a blocked blood vessel, you may lose about 3.6 years of your life in terms of aging of your brain. So that's how dramatic that is. So time is brain. There's no question that the most efficient way that we can find to get the patient to the right location and identify what kind of treatment they need and be able to reestablish the blood flow to the brain is essential to preserve or to give them the best chance to return to the normal life again.
So how does this software work? How does it do that?
So maybe the best thing to do is to understand how it used to be done, and then you can see how much of an impact this is. In general, when you come to the hospital with a problem, not moving your arm and leg or not be able to speak, the emergency room team will assess you. You're going to go to a scan to get a picture of your brain, and then you're going to return to the emergency room, and then with the results, they're going to call all the teams involved. That process can take 1 to 2 hours sometimes to get all this done. What the software is doing is that letting the CAT scan being smart in terms of having the power to, as you get in the pictures, you already are understanding what is showing and telling the team that needs to be there to take care of you, know that there is a patient right now in the scanner that may need a surgery, may need a procedure, may need to have a stroke treatment. So that time takes probably 4 to 6 minutes to get that done. So now you're shaving off from a process of hours into minutes. And so if you go back to that time is brain, then you think that how much you have saved of brain cells if you're able to activate everybody to come in that moment and identify the right patient.
Helping that patient to have a much greater chance of full functioning.
Exactly. So stroke is the #1 cause of disability in our population. Affects about 30 million people globally. So like if you think about the ability to go have a stroke, but then return to your normal life, the odds are against you. So the best thing to do is to be able to offer highly effective treatment. So what we call
right away.
Right away. So mechanical thrombectomy, which is a treatment that we offer, is a treatment that you go inside of the blood vessels and you kind of snake the clot out of the blood vessel. That type of treatment is extremely powerful, but it has to arrive in time to the patients to be able to be effective.
So getting back to this software, using AI, literally over a phone, or do you have to go to a computer? This is an app, virtually.
Exactly. So I think the beauty of this is that not only you're getting you're activating, you're letting all the members of the team at the same time the information that they need to know. So you're sharing information with a large group of people instead of getting a phone call to each one of them. So that makes it much more efficient. But now at your fingertips in your smartphone, you're able to see the images in a way that you can, in the past, you could only see in the hospital with the supercomputers and everything. Nowadays, you can do that at your fingertips. You have all the information you need, but more importantly, all the members of the team can see the same thing.
And weigh in on a particular case.
Exactly. So you go in the past, you could have maybe 8 years of experience watching the scanner as you're having with the patient there, but now you have 80 years of experience because of all the team members looking at the same image and be able to say, my advice is to do this and that. So I think what's increasing for us is the speed, but also the ability to share the information and the visibility of that case to every member of the team.
Does this mean, though, that you're at dinner with your family or grocery shopping and you get an alert on this app and have to all of a sudden get on a case?
All the time.
All the time.
All the time.
That's why you get paid the big doc bucks. Could this sort of software put healthcare professionals out of jobs? I mean, are we virtually automating healthcare?
Well, absolutely. I think there will be a change like we're seeing in our society in general. What we need to do is to be in the driving seat of this. So there's no question that this is a game changer. The bottom line is our patients and our patient safety. This is for sure improving the quality of healthcare. So I think that physicians will embrace this and will be able to be basically dictating how to best use this. In my lifestyle, this is an incredible improvement because it allows me to then know early on which patients I need to be present to help, and also early on so that I can then stop everything that I'm doing and then move into the care of my patient. Outcomes, the results of the surgery are also much better if you do that procedure early on. So imagine that if you didn't have that in the past, you would have less chance to have patients coming to you with such a good opportunity to spare their brain cells or having problems like they're having in the past.
Advocate's the only hospital in the region to be using this. Why aren't more, or do you foresee this becoming more popular?
I mean, we're pioneers in stroke care, so I think this is definitely going to roll out we will have in all the hospitals from the Advocate Network and Advocate Aurora eventually, but I think this will be basically universal. I think at
probably more apps as well, not just for strokes.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And then just before we go, what tips do you have? You talked about how common strokes are. What are some prevention tips?
Well, number one, I would say identification of stroke. So remember, fast, face, arm, speech, time. So call for help if you see anybody having any problems with any one of those face, arm, speech, weakness in the arm, face weakness, or inability to talk. Prevention, go to your primary care doctor, check your blood pressure, make sure your cholesterol is checked, know your numbers, be active,
healthy,
be
basically.
proactive, exactly.
Well, thank you so very much for joining us, Dr. Lopez. And now, Paris, back to you.
Thanks, Amanda. Recently was the silver anniversary of a Chicago independent record label that sets the gold standard for roots music in the city and beyond. Bloodshot Records started on the fringes of the music scene and staked a claim with rock and country, shot through with punk and soul. We visited their headquarters on the eve of their 25th anniversary back in November and got an earful. Here's Jay Shefsky with another listen.
I am a big town. There are monsters on the prowl.
At Bloodshot Records, John Langford bangs out a new song about his adopted hometown.
And now the sharp end is coming round, and I must clutch it to my breast.
The veteran rocker from Wales says he'd been burned by record labels before his long relationship with Bloodshot.
Now, I will say Bloodshot were the first people who ever sent me a royalty check. I was completely baffled, because I had a check for something like $39 or something. It was unusual for everything before that in the music industry. You have to scratch and beg for money, but they willingly sent me a check. I love Bloodshot Records.
The label's music ranges from country blues to soulful rock. Here's the late Mr. Rhythm, Andre Williams, at WTTW with John Langford on guitar.
So where are the honky-tonks in Chicago?
And they do straight up honky-tonk.
We were seeing all these bands around town at tiny little clubs that didn't necessarily know about one another, that were all touching on roots music in some weird way and kind of operating independently of one another and just very organically creating this sound. And we thought, well, here's a good place for us to stitch it together and kind of make a scene out of it and give it a name and some kind of identity.
It's been called alt country, insurgent country, even y'alternative. Sometimes it's pure party music.
Bloodshot could not have happened anywhere else other than Chicago. Chicago is not a company town. It's not New York, it's not LA, it's not Nashville. There's not people trying to get signed every night. They're not trying to impress A&R people. They're not trying to be pop stars. They're doing what they're doing in a very free and open way.
In 25 years, Bloodshot has released 300 records, including early LPs by Nico Case and Ryan Adams, and later recordings by music vets Graham Parker and Alejandro Escovedo. It all started with a compilation of unsigned local bands.
We figured it out as we went. We did not look beyond that first compilation of Chicago bands, and as that rolled out, we realized that we had touched a nerve around the country. People from Dallas and St. Louis and San Francisco, New York were starting to call us and say, hey, we've got a few bands like that around here, and no one's doing anything with it.
They came up to me and said they were making an album of country music, and would I like to be on it? Did I have a song? It was as simple as that. They asked me to write a song, and I did.
Now there's a team of 6 full-time employees to bring in the latest stock from Chicago vinyl maker Smashed Plastic and to manage the merch. Like any independent shop, they just want you to value what they do.
If you profess to love independent music, you as a fan need to support it, because no one's getting rich here. Everyone exists on the fringes, and we're doing it for a very basic love of it, but the economic model is largely unsustainable. We're absolutely foolhardy to continue to do it.
No one knows anybody here. I am a big town.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Jay Shefsky.
Only in Chicago, Bloodshot Records celebrated their 25th anniversary in November with a new recording called Too Late to Pray, Defiant Chicago Roots. And you can find out more on Bloodshot Records on our website. And now we go to Phil Ponce and a new discovery about static electricity. Phil.
Most of us have experienced static electricity in some form. It's that shock you feel when you touch a metal doorknob after dragging your feet across the carpet. And it's the hair-raising effect of rubbing a balloon on your head. And while static electricity was first described more than 2,500 years ago, scientists have never been able to fully explain what causes it. At Northwestern University, 2 doctoral students, along with their professor, have now developed a model that they say helps explain static electricity, possibly opening the doors for controlling and applying its energy. Joining us now is that Professor Lawrence Marks, Professor of Materials Science and Engineering at Northwestern University. Professor, welcome to Chicago Tonight.
Thank you.
And to put it simply, what exactly is static electricity?
Static electricity is when you have a lot of normally electrons and they just accumulate on a material. It's kind of like what you have in lightning.
And what did your research tell you about how this material manifests itself as static electricity?
Well, when you have 2 pieces of material and you rub them together, you actually end up deforming very small pieces. And when you deform those very small pieces, that actually gives you voltages, and that's what leads to static electricity.
And this was your discovery. This, for example, explain what we're looking at.
Right, what you're looking at is the sort of rough surface you have on the left-hand side, which is normal to almost any material. It's a little bit like looking at the Earth from the moon. From the moon, it looks really smooth. But if you actually sit on the Earth, it's actually very rough. And these little rough features at the nanoscale, when you slide 2 materials against each other, they actually bend. And it's that bending which gives you the voltages, and those voltages are what means that the electrons change their position, and that gives you static electricity.
So it's this discovery or this proposal or this way of looking at it regarding the bending of these rough surfaces, that is the new insight, is that it?
That is the new insight.
And this, the question of what causes static electricity, as we alluded to in the lead, has been around literally for millennia. Why hasn't it been fully explained before?
It was complicated. People had done a lot of work, but everybody kept on getting different results. And whereas there were some simple ideas, they didn't work. You can actually take 2 materials, 2 pieces of exactly the same material, and rub them against each other, and they will actually produce static electricity. It was adding in this idea that the bending is what matters. That's the contribution, that's the big part of the contribution we made. And that's the key to understanding it, we believe.
And when you say we, you're referring to your team, which includes 2 graduate students, and you've said that you've modestly said that they did most of the work.
They did most of the work.
All right. Well, do you believe that this insight into the bending that takes place, does this answer the question once and for all? I mean, is this the reason that static electricity occurs, or might there be another explanation?
We believe this is really at the heart of everything.
And what makes you think that?
It fits so many other things. In science, you know something is right when it actually matches other pieces of information. And this model ended up predicting explaining a large number of other pieces of information.
And so why is it important to know what the origins of static electricity are?
Well, I think there's 2 sides. One is, it's actually very dangerous. It's one of the big ways that you can create fires. And at chemical plants, you actually have to worry about it. You probably know you don't touch your car too much when you're putting gas in. You don't want to create a spark. That's one thing, but also we can exploit static electricity. There's a big drive at the moment for what are called wearable electronics. And these are going to be little devices that you have on your hand. A little bit like the watch, the Apple Watch. They're going to be used for medical and lots of other purposes. You want to power them. How are you going to do that? Well, when you move your hand around or you just walk, you can actually create static electricity by just rubbing two pieces of something against each other.
And that energy has heretofore not been harnessed?
That's right. And you can use it to power the electronics.
And so what does your insights do, what does this insight do about preventing it in situations that are dangerous, say in a chemical plant or when you're putting gasoline in your car and so forth?
Well, we know what type of materials are going to have a lot of static electricity, and we know what type of materials are not. So I said earlier that there's all this roughness on the surface. You get rid of that roughness, you'll have less static electricity.
And is it conceivable that one can get rid of this roughness?
One can, yes.
I see. So where do you go from here? Where does the world of science go from here now that you have solved, apparently, a big piece of the puzzle?
Well, we solved one piece. There's always more to science. We actually have another piece of work coming up, and then there's lots of ways we're thinking about applying this and using it in other cases.
I see. And obviously some potentially commercial applications for this, as we alluded to.
Oh, yes. Unfortunately, I'm not a very commercial person.
Well, Lawrence Marks, Professor, thank you so much for being here. Congratulations to you and your team of graduates.
Thank you.
And we're back with more right after this.
Coverage of science and technology on Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Joel M. Friedman, president of the Alvin H. Baum Family Fund.
And that's our show for this Thursday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news. And you can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night at 7 for the Week in Review. Now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Paris Schutz. I thank you for watching. Have a great night.
Closed captioning for this program is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, pleased to give back to the community through numerous charitable initiatives.